The black SUV pulled up to the mansion gates at exactly 7:30 p.m. Through tinted windows, I watched the valets freeze mid-step, their eyes tracking the convoy of 3 vehicles that had just arrived in perfect formation. This wasn't a casual entrance. This was a statement. My lead security officer, Marcus, stepped out first. 6'4", former Secret Service, the kind of presence that doesn't ask for respect. It commands it. 2 more team members flanked the vehicle, their movements precise, professional, deliberate. The valet who'd been laughing seconds before went silent. Then my door opened. The evening air hit my face as I stepped onto the cobblestone driveway, my Louboutins clicking against stone that probably cost more per square foot than my childhood apartment. My dress was Dior, custom-fitted, midnight black with a neckline that suggested power without saying a word. My security team formed around me like I was visiting royalty. I could see him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Daniel, my ex-fiancé. The man who'd invited me to this party for one reason only, to parade me in front of his new elite friends as the charity case he'd graciously dated before upgrading. His handwritten note had been clear. Come see how the other half lives. You'll find it educational. He'd wanted to humiliate me one last time. Show everyone the girl he'd outgrown. But as I walked toward those doors, flanked by a security detail that cost more per hour than he made in a week, I watched his champagne glass slip from his fingers. His face went white. His new girlfriend's smile froze mid-laugh. None of them knew why I was really there, or what was about to happen to his perfect life. It happened 6 months ago at his promotion celebration. Daniel had just made partner at his father's investment firm, a position he'd been handed, not earned, though he'd never admit that. He'd insisted I come to dinner at some exclusive restaurant in Tribeca where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I'd worn my best dress, the navy one I'd bought on sale 2 years ago and had dry cleaned specially for the occasion. I'd thought I looked nice, professional. The moment I arrived, I knew I didn't belong. Every woman there was dripping in designer labels and inherited jewelry. Every man wore watches worth more than cars. Daniel greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You made it, he'd said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I wasn't sure you'd be able to afford the cab fare. His colleagues laughed. Polite laughter. The kind that's worse than cruel laughter because it's coded in false civility. I felt my face burn, but I smiled, kept my dignity. Throughout dinner, he made comments, small cuts designed to bleed me slowly in front of an audience. She works in data entry, he explained to his boss, making my actual job as a financial analyst sound like secretarial work. Very humble beginnings. I've been trying to help her understand how real business works. His boss's wife looked at me with something like pity. How charitable of you, Daniel. Not everyone would be willing to date down like that. The table went quiet for half a second before someone changed the subject. But the damage was done. I'd been labeled, categorized, dismissed. The breaking point came at the end of the night. We stepped outside while he waited for his car, his new BMW that his father had given him as a promotion gift. I congratulated him, genuinely happy despite everything. That's when he said it. You know this can't last, right? His voice was matter-of-fact, cold. I'm moving up in the world. I need someone who fits, someone who already knows how to navigate these circles. You're sweet, but you're a liability now. He broke up with me on the sidewalk outside that restaurant, in my sale dress and discount heels, while his colleagues walked past pretending not to notice. I'll always be grateful for what we had, but I need an equal now. Someone from my world. You understand. Then he got into his BMW and drove away, leaving me standing there while the valet pretended not to see me cry. I walked to the subway station. Rode home in silence, surrounded by strangers who had no idea my entire future had just collapsed. When I got back to my studio apartment, the one Daniel had always made jokes about, I looked in the mirror and made a decision. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to accept his version of my worth. What happened next changed everything. My name is Sarah Chen, and I grew up in a rent-controlled apartment in Chinatown with my mother, my grandmother, and 2 younger sisters in a space designed for half that many people. My mother worked as a seamstress in a factory downtown, 14-hour days hunched over industrial sewing machines. My grandmother watched my sisters while I went to school and worked. I learned early that intelligence was my only currency. I couldn't afford designer clothes or summer camps or SAT prep courses, but I could study. I could work harder than everyone else. I turned free library access into a full scholarship to NYU. I turned that scholarship into a degree in finance with honors. I turned that degree into a job as a junior financial analyst at a mid-size firm. The job wasn't glamorous. I analyzed market data, built projection models, created reports that senior partners presented to clients as if they'd done the work themselves. I was good at it. Really good. My models were consistently accurate. My analysis caught patterns others missed. But in a world where your last name mattered more than your skill set, being good wasn't enough to be seen. I'd met Daniel at a networking event 2 years ago. He'd been charming, attentive, interested in my work. For the first time, someone from that world seemed to see past my cheap blazer and student loan debt. He asked me out, introduced me to his friends, made me feel like maybe I could belong. But slowly, subtly, things changed. He started making comments about my apartment, my clothes, my background. Constructive criticism, he called it. I'm trying to help you fit in. He bought me a designer purse for my birthday, then got angry when I didn't carry it everywhere. Do you know how much that cost? The least you could do is use it. I started to shrink. Started to apologize for things that weren't apologies. My job, my family, my history. Started to believe that maybe he was right. Maybe I was lucky he'd chosen me. Looking back now, I can see how methodically he dismantled my confidence, how he made his acceptance feel like a gift I had to earn daily. I didn't know it then, but every little comment was training me to doubt myself. After he left me on that sidewalk, I spent 2 weeks in a fog. Going through the motions at work, avoiding friends who might ask questions I couldn't answer, wondering if he'd been right all along. Then my boss called me into her office, and everything changed in ways I never could have predicted. Victoria Zhang was a legend in the financial world. Self-made billionaire, founder of Zhang Capital, one of the most successful investment firms in Asia and North America. She'd built her empire from nothing, navigating a male-dominated industry with ruthless intelligence and unshakable integrity. She was also, coincidentally, a major client of our firm. She'd requested a meeting to review some projections our senior partners had presented. Standard procedure. Except our senior partners had made a critical error in the data, an error I'd caught 3 days earlier and flagged in a memo that had apparently been ignored. When Victoria arrived with her team, I was asked to sit in as a junior analyst, to take notes, to be invisible. The meeting started well enough. Our partners presented the projections with confidence. Victoria listened in silence, her expression unreadable. Then she asked a single question. What's your assumed growth rate for the Southeast Asian market in Q3? Our lead partner confidently cited a number. Victoria's eyes narrowed. That number is based on pre-pandemic data. It's not only outdated, it's catastrophically wrong. The room went silent. Our partner stammered, trying to explain. Victoria cut him off. Who built this model? She wasn't angry. She was surgical, precise. It was a collaborative effort, our partner said vaguely. Victoria's gaze swept the room and landed on me. You, the one taking notes, did you work on this model? I should have stayed quiet. Should have let the senior partners handle it. But Victoria Zhang was looking directly at me, and something in her expression told me she already knew the answer. I built the initial model, I said quietly. But I flagged a concern about the Q3 growth assumptions 3 days ago. The Southeast Asian market has shifted significantly. Using outdated data would cost approximately $40 million in projected losses. You could have heard a pin drop. Do you have documentation of this concern? Victoria asked. I pulled out my tablet, pulled up the memo I'd sent, and handed it to her. She read it in silence. Then she looked at our senior partners with an expression that could have frozen fire. Gentlemen, I came here because your firm was recommended as competent. Instead, I find you presenting analysis you didn't build, ignoring warnings from the person who actually understands the data, and wasting my time with projections that would have destroyed my portfolio. She stood. We're done here. Expect termination of our contract by end of day. Then she turned to me. Ms. Chen, I'm going to need your contact information. The senior partners looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. Victoria walked out with her team, and the moment the door closed, hell broke loose. But I barely heard the chaos. Because 3 hours later, Victoria's assistant called. Victoria wanted to hire me, not as a junior analyst, as a senior strategist for her firm, reporting directly to her, with a salary that was triple what I currently made. Victoria hires people who are competent, honest, and willing to speak truth to power, even when it's uncomfortable, her assistant explained. You demonstrated all three in under 5 minutes. I accepted. And 3 days later, I walked into Jung Capital and into a world where merit actually mattered. Where being right was valued more than being agreeable. Where someone like me, a girl from Chinatown with no connections and a ruthless work ethic, could not only survive, but thrive. Working for Victoria Zhang was like drinking from a fire hose. She expected excellence, rewarded competence, and had zero tolerance for mediocrity. But she also invested in her people in ways I'd never experienced. Within the first month, she'd enrolled me in executive training programs that cost more than my previous year's salary. Within 3 months, I was leading strategy sessions with clients whose portfolios were worth billions. The work was intense. 14-hour days were standard. Weekends were rare. But for the first time in my career, I was being challenged intellectually rather than tolerated socially. Victoria would call me at midnight with questions about market analysis. She'd debate strategy with me like we were equals. She'd present my work to clients under my name, not hers. Own your expertise, she told me. Never let anyone take credit for your intelligence. My salary increased twice in 4 months. I moved out of my studio into a real apartment. I paid off my mother's credit card debt. I bought my grandmother the comfortable chair she'd always wanted. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was internal. I stopped apologizing for being smart. Stopped dimming my competence to make others comfortable. Stopped believing that being underestimated was somehow my fault. Then came the client meeting that changed everything. Jung Capital was handling a major acquisition for a tech company, and I'd been asked to present the financial analysis. The client's CEO was notorious for being difficult. He'd rejected 3 previous presentations from other firms. Victoria told me to ignore his reputation and present the data as I saw it, so I did. He questioned everything, challenged every assumption, tried to find holes in my methodology. But I'd done the work. Really done it. After 45 minutes of interrogation, he leaned back in his chair. "Where did you find her?" he asked Victoria. "And how do I steal her?" Victoria smiled. "You don't, but you can hire our firm." He did. The deal was worth $80 million. Victoria gave me a bonus larger than my previous year's entire salary and told me I'd earned it. "You're not lucky," she said. "You're skilled. Learn the difference." That's when I realized I'd stopped thinking about Daniel, stopped checking his social media, stopped caring about his world. I was building my own. Then the invitation arrived. Thick cardstock, embossed lettering, hand-delivered to my office, Daniel's engagement party. At his family's mansion in the Hamptons. Black tie. The handwritten note inside made my stomach turn. "Sarah, I'd love for you to come see how things have worked out. You'll meet Claire. She's everything I needed. No hard feelings. It'll be good for you to see what you can aspire to." The condescension was breathtaking. He'd invited me to be humiliated, to witness his upgrade, to remind me of my place. I threw the invitation in the trash. But Victoria pulled it out during our weekly one-on-one. "You're not going?" she asked. I explained that Daniel was my ex, that he'd dumped me for not being elite enough, that this invitation was designed to hurt. Victoria read the note with an expression I couldn't decipher. Then she made a phone call. "Michael? Victoria Zhang. I need your team for a private security detail. Full executive protection protocol. Saturday night. The Hamptons." She hung up and looked at me. "You're going. Not because he invited you. Because you've earned the right to walk into any room in the world and be seen as exactly who you are. Brilliant, accomplished, and untouchable." I tried to refuse. Victoria overruled me. "This isn't about revenge. This is about refusing to be invisible. You'll go with security because that's what executives at your level have. You'll go in a car I'm lending you because you're representing our firm. And you'll go knowing that everything he tried to make you believe about yourself was a lie." She paused. "Besides, Michael's team is excellent. Trust me, this will be very satisfying." So here I was, 6 months after being dumped on a sidewalk, standing outside Daniel's family mansion with a 3-vehicle security convoy and a dress that cost more than his car. And the look on his face through those windows told me Victoria had been right. Marcus's voice came through the discreet earpiece. "Ms. Chen, we're ready when you are." His tone was professional, calm. I took one breath, steadied myself, then nodded. The walk from the car to the entrance felt like a mile and 100 feet simultaneously. Each step was measured, unhurried, deliberate. My security team moved with me in perfect formation. We looked like a presidential detail. We were supposed to. Conversations on the lawn stopped mid-sentence. A woman in a Chanel dress actually grabbed her husband's arm and pointed. The valet who'd laughed earlier now stood at attention. Through the open doors, I could see the party inside going quiet in waves as people noticed the arrival. We reached the entrance. The doorman took one look at Marcus and the security team and simply stepped aside. We walked in. The foyer was exactly what you'd expect from old money trying to look older. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, art that was probably worth more than most people's houses. A string quartet played in the corner. Champagne flowed. And every single person had stopped what they were doing to stare. I could see Daniel frozen near the bar, his face cycling through emotions faster than I could track them. Confusion, recognition, shock, something like fear. His fiancée Claire stood next to him in a dress that probably cost a fortune, but looked suddenly less impressive. Her mouth had actually fallen open. Victoria had taught me that power isn't about aggression, it's about certainty. So I didn't rush, didn't look nervous, didn't seek approval from anyone. I simply walked through that foyer like I'd been born in rooms like this. The crowd parted without anyone consciously deciding to move. A waiter appeared at my elbow with champagne. Marcus intercepted him with a subtle gesture, checked the glass with professional efficiency, then nodded to me. I took it. The whole interaction took 5 seconds and communicated everything it needed to. I was important enough to warrant security protocols. Daniel was moving toward me now, his face fixed in a smile that looked painful. He'd recovered enough to remember he was the host. But his eyes betrayed him. They were doing calculations, trying to understand what he was seeing. "Sarah," he said as he reached me, his voice strained. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." His eyes kept darting to Marcus, to the other security personnel. "This is unexpected." He gestured vaguely at the security team, trying to turn it into a joke and failing. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" I smiled. The kind of smile Victoria used in boardrooms when she was about to destroy someone's argument. "No trouble, Daniel. This is just standard protocol now. You understand." I let the words hang there. Let him absorb the implications. That I had become someone who needed security. Someone important enough to warrant this level of protection. Someone so far above his social tier that we were no longer playing the same game. His fiancée Claire appeared at his side, her curiosity apparently stronger than her manners. "Daniel didn't mention you were successful." The word came out like an accusation. "He probably didn't know," I said simply. "We haven't spoken in months." I took a sip of champagne, letting the moment stretch. Then Marcus leaned in slightly. "Ms. Chen, you have a call in 15 minutes. Daniel's face did something complicated. He'd just heard my security guard call me Ms. Chen with the kind of professional respect usually reserved for executives and politicians. Not Sarah, not honey or any of the diminutive terms he'd used when we dated. Ms. Chen, like I was someone who mattered. "I should circulate," I said, already moving past him. "Congratulations on your engagement. Claire, your dress is lovely." Then I walked away, my security team moving with me, leaving Daniel and Claire standing there like furniture. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one feeling small. He was. The whispers followed me like ripples in water. Every conversation I passed would stutter, pause, recalibrate. People were trying to figure out who I was, how I fit into their social hierarchy, why someone like me commanded this level of attention. An older woman in diamonds that could probably fund a small country approached with the confidence of someone used to getting answers. "I don't believe we've met," she said, her tone making it clear this was an interrogation disguised as pleasantry. "Are you a friend of Daniel's family?" "Professional acquaintance," I said smoothly. "I work in finance." It was technically true. It was also a massive understatement. But I'd learned from Victoria that powerful people rarely felt the need to explain themselves completely. "Oh, how lovely," the woman said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Which firm?" She was fishing, trying to place me. Before I could answer, a man's voice cut through the conversation. "Jean Capital, if I'm not mistaken." I turned. "Robert Morrison, CEO of Morrison Tech, one of Victoria's major clients, one of the biggest deals I'd worked on. Sarah Chen," he said, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here. Small world." He turned to the woman in diamonds. "Mrs. Hartwell, Daniel's mother, I believe. You should know Ms. Chen is one of the most brilliant financial strategists I've worked with. She's the lead analyst who structured our recent acquisition. Saved us from making an $80 million mistake." I watched Mrs. Hartwell's face reorganize itself, from dismissive to confused, to something approximating respect in under 5 seconds. "Zhang Capital," she repeated. "Victoria Zhang's firm." She said the name with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty. Because in the financial world, Victoria was royalty. And I'd just been publicly identified as her lead strategist by a CEO whose company was worth billions. The dynamic in the immediate area shifted like air pressure before a storm. Suddenly, people who'd been politely ignoring me were finding reasons to drift closer. Someone asked about market trends. Another wanted my opinion on a recent tech IPO. They weren't being polite. They were genuinely interested. Daniel appeared at the edge of the group, his smile now looking painted on. I could see him trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he'd believed about me. The girl who did data entry, the charity case, the liability. Except none of that had been true. Claire stood behind him, her face a mask of frozen politeness. But her eyes were sharp, calculating. She was smart enough to understand what was happening. Her fiancé's ex-girlfriend wasn't just successful. She was operating at a level that made his promotion to partner look like a participation trophy. Robert Morrison continued talking, apparently unaware of the social warfare happening around him. "Victoria speaks very highly of you. Said you're being groomed for partner track. That's not something she says lightly." He chuckled. "I tried to hire you away last month. She threatened to drop Morrison Tech as a client if I poached you. First time in 20 years she's made that kind of threat over personnel." The circle around us had grown. Mrs. Hartwell looked like she was mentally recalculating every assumption she'd made. And Daniel himself looked like he wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow him whole. Marcus stepped forward slightly. "Ms. Chen, your call in 5 minutes." I smiled at Robert Morrison. "It was good to see you, Robert. We should have lunch next week. I have some thoughts on the Q4 strategy." Then I turned to Mrs. Hartwell. "Lovely to meet you. Beautiful home." My tone was perfectly calibrated, professional, polite, and completely devoid of the deference she was probably used to receiving. As I moved away, I could feel the weight of every eye in that foyer. The whispers intensified, and Daniel stood frozen in the middle of it all, realizing that the narrative he'd constructed, the poor girl he'd magnanimously dated, the charity case he'd outgrown, was crumbling in real time. But the real revelation hadn't even started yet. The library was exactly where I remembered it, from Daniel's stories. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books that probably hadn't been opened in decades, a fireplace big enough to stand in. His father, Richard Hartwell, was there with two other men I recognized from financial circles. They'd stepped away from the party for cigars and what Daniel always called real business talk. I walked in with Marcus at my shoulder. All three men looked up, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Richard Hartwell's expression cycled from irritation to confusion. "Can we help you?" His tone made it clear I should be anywhere but here. "Mr. Hartwell," I said calmly, "I'm Sarah Chen. I work for Jang Capital. I think we need to have a conversation about your son's activities at Hartwell Investments." Richard's face hardened. "I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but this is neither the time nor place." I pulled out my tablet, opened a file, turned the screen toward him. "Then let me make this very clear. Your son has been running a scheme through Hartwell Investments for the past 18 months. Front-running client trades, using insider information from his position to make personal investments ahead of institutional orders." The room went absolutely silent. The other two men leaned forward to see the tablet screen. I'd spent the last 2 weeks compiling this information, not because I'd been looking for it, but because I'd noticed something odd while doing routine due diligence. A pattern. Small trades executed minutes before major institutional purchases. Always profitable. Always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic compliance reviews. "That's a serious accusation," Richard said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Do you have proof?" I swiped through the files, trade records, timestamps, email correspondence I'd obtained through perfectly legal channels. 47 instances over 18 months. Total illegal profits estimated at $2.3 million. All traced back to accounts registered under shell companies that Daniel helped set up. One of the other men, James Chen, ironically no relation, a senior partner at a competing firm, went pale. "Richard, if this is true, Hartwell Investments will lose its licenses. The SEC doesn't play games with front-running." He looked at me. "How did you discover this?" His tone wasn't accusatory. It was professional, one analyst to another. "I was doing due diligence on a merger," I explained. "One of the companies involved had used Hartwell Investments as an advisor 6 months ago. Something in the trade patterns looked wrong. Once you know what to look for, the pattern becomes obvious. Small individual purchases right before large institutional orders. Different shell companies, but all linked to the same offshore accounts. All benefiting from information Daniel had access to through his position." Richard Hartwell sank into one of the leather chairs. His face had gone from angry to gray. "Daniel told me you were nobody. Some girl he dated briefly. Data entry." He said it like he was talking to himself, trying to understand how this had happened. "I'm a senior financial strategist at Jang Capital," I said simply. "And I'm very good at my job, which is why I recognized what your son was doing, which is also why I felt obligated to report it." I paused. "The SEC received my report 3 days ago. I imagine you'll be hearing from them very soon. I came tonight because I thought you deserved to know before it becomes public. Professional courtesy." James Chen was already on his phone. The third man was staring at the tablet like it contained nuclear codes. Richard Hartwell looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why?" he asked. "Why tell me? Why not just let the SEC handle it? Why come here tonight?" It was a legitimate question, And I'd spent days thinking about the answer. Because Daniel invited me here to humiliate me, I said quietly. To show me off as the charity case he'd outgrown. To remind me that I didn't belong in his world. But the truth is, he's the one who doesn't belong. Not in finance. Not in any industry that requires integrity. He took advantage of his position, his family's reputation, and his clients' trust to make money illegally. He did it because he thought he was untouchable. That people like me were too insignificant to notice. Too powerless to matter. I closed the tablet. I'm here because I wanted him to understand that being underestimated isn't the same as being powerless. And I wanted you to know that the damage to Hartwell Investments isn't my fault. It's his. He did this. I just refuse to ignore it. Marcus shifted slightly behind me. Time to leave. Time to let them process. Time to let the consequences unfold. Richard Hartwell didn't try to stop me as I walked out. Neither did the others. They were already making calls, activating lawyers, trying to get ahead of a scandal that was about to consume everything. As I stepped back into the hallway, I could hear raised voices from the library. The beginning of the end. The party imploded within 30 minutes. I watched from the terrace as Daniel was called into the library. His face confused and then panicked as he understood what was happening. Claire followed him, her expression shifting from concern to horror as the truth unfolded. The library doors closed, but everyone could hear the shouting. Marcus stood beside me, his expression professionally neutral, but I caught a hint of satisfaction. Victoria will be pleased, he said quietly. I shook my head. The SEC was already investigating. I just gave them the final evidence they needed. This was inevitable. I just accelerated the timeline. Inside, the party had gone from celebration to crisis management in record time. Richard Hartwell emerged from the library looking 20 years older, his face ashen. He gathered several senior partners and disappeared into his home office. Claire stumbled out after him, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. The guests were beginning to notice something was wrong. Someone's phone buzzed, then another. Within minutes, half the room was checking their phones, reading something that was clearly spreading through their networks. I pulled out my own phone. The Wall Street Journal had just published a breaking news alert. Hartwell Investments under SEC investigation for securities fraud. The timing was perfect. Victoria had coordinated with the Journal to ensure the story broke tonight, at this party, during Daniel's celebration. Not because she was cruel, but because she understood that in the world of elite finance, reputation was currency. Daniel emerged from the library like a ghost. His face was white. His expensive suit suddenly looked wrong on him, like costume jewelry on someone pretending to be wealthy. He spotted me on the terrace, and something in his expression cracked. He walked toward me with the uncertain gait of someone in shock. Marcus stepped forward slightly, but I waved him back. This was Daniel's moment to understand what he'd lost. You did this, Daniel said. Not a question, a statement. His voice was hollow. You destroyed me, because I broke up with you, because you couldn't handle that I'd moved on. He was trying to reframe it. Make this about revenge, about a bitter ex-girlfriend. Anything except what it actually was. Consequences for his own actions. No, I said calmly. You destroyed yourself. I just refused to pretend I didn't notice. You committed securities fraud, Daniel. You broke the law. You betrayed your client's trust. You used your position to steal money. That's not my fault. That's yours. I paused. I didn't do this because you broke up with me. I did this because it was the right thing to do. Because fraud is fraud regardless of who commits it. He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You ruined my life over a technicality, over some trades that everyone does. You're being vindictive. His desperation was almost painful to watch. He genuinely couldn't understand that actions have consequences. That being from a wealthy family didn't make him immune to the law. Everyone doesn't do it, I said. Most people in finance follow the rules. Most people understand that trust is the foundation of this industry. You didn't. You thought you were special, untouchable. You thought that girls like me existed to be impressed by people like you, to be grateful for your attention, to disappear when you were done with them. I could feel the months of diminishment in those words, the careful cuts, the systematic erosion of my confidence. But I didn't disappear, I continued. I got better. I got stronger. I became someone who actually belongs in rooms you only access through family connections. And when I saw what you were doing, I had a choice. Ignore it because exposing you would be uncomfortable. Or do my job with integrity. I chose integrity. That's not revenge. That's character. Behind him, the party was emptying. Guests were making excuses, calling for cars, distancing themselves from the scandal with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Hartwell stood in the foyer looking devastated. Claire had disappeared completely, and Daniel stood on the terrace with me, finally understanding that the girl he'd dumped on a sidewalk 6 months ago had just dismantled his entire future with evidence he'd never imagined she'd find. I invited you here to humiliate you, he said quietly, almost wonderingly. I wanted you to see what you'd lost, who I'd become. He laughed, a broken sound. And instead, he couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, I'd exposed him, destroyed his reputation, ended his career, proved that he'd never been successful at all, just privileged. Go home, Daniel, I said, not unkindly. Get a lawyer. Cooperate with the SEC. Maybe you'll avoid prison. Maybe you'll just lose your license and pay enormous fines. Either way, your career in finance is over. And that's not because of me. It's because of the choices you made, the laws you broke, the integrity you never had. I walked past him, Marcus falling into step beside me. The remaining guests parted like water, their eyes following my security team with new understanding. I wasn't just successful. I was the weapon that had just destroyed one of their own. Let them wonder. Let them be more careful. Let them remember that the people they underestimate are often the ones watching most closely. By the time I reached the car, the party had effectively ended. Valets were scrambling to bring vehicles. People were leaving in clusters, already on their phones, spreading the story, protecting their own reputations by expressing shock and distance. As we pulled away, I looked back once. Daniel was still standing on that terrace, alone, watching the wreckage of his life scattered around him like debris from an explosion. I felt no joy, no triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that truth had won, that competence had defeated privilege, that the girl from Chinatown had proven she belonged in rooms that people like Daniel only inherited access to. The fallout from the Hartwell scandal dominated financial news for weeks. The SEC investigation moved quickly once they had my documentation. Daniel was charged with 47 counts of securities fraud. His trading license was permanently revoked. He avoided prison through a plea deal, but faced millions in fines and restitution. Hartwell Investments lost half its clients within a month. The family name became synonymous with scandal, but my story moved in the opposite direction. Victoria called me into her office the Monday after the party. The board met this morning, she said without preamble. We're making you partner, youngest in the firm's history, effective immediately. I stared at her. Partner. It meant equity, serious money, decision-making authority, a seat at tables where empires were built and broken. You've earned it, Victoria continued. Not because you exposed Hartwell, though that demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity this firm values, but because you're brilliant at your job, because clients request you specifically, because you make this firm better by being part of it. She paused. And because I'm tired of other firms trying to poach you. The promotion changed everything. Suddenly I was being invited to speak at conferences. Business schools wanted me for guest lectures. The Financial Times profiled me as one of 30 under 30 to watch. My mother cried when I told her. My grandmother lit incense and thanked our ancestors. My sisters teased me about being a big shot, but their pride was obvious. More importantly, I started mentoring. Young analysts who reminded me of who I'd been, smart, capable, overlooked. Women from backgrounds that didn't include trust funds and legacy admissions. People who worked 3 times as hard for half the recognition. I made sure they knew they belonged, that competence mattered more than connections, that being underestimated was temporary, that power came from refusing to accept someone else's definition of your worth. 6 months after the scandal, I was invited to speak at NYU's business school, my alma mater. The auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, alumni. They wanted to hear about the Hartwell case, about navigating elite finance as an outsider, about building credibility in a world designed to exclude people like us. I stood at that podium and looked out at faces that looked like mine, young, uncertain, brilliant, wondering if they could really make it. I grew up in Chinatown, I began. My mother was a seamstress. I wore thrift store clothes to job interviews. I dated someone who treated my background like a character flaw, who made me believe that being from nowhere meant I'd never get anywhere. The room was absolutely silent. And for a while, I believed him. I believed that intelligence wasn't enough, that hard work couldn't overcome the wrong last name, that people like us were meant to watch from the outside while others lived the lives we wanted. I paused, let the words settle. But I was wrong. Not about the barriers. Those are real. The world of elite finance is designed to exclude outsiders, to reward privilege over competence, to make you feel like you don't belong. But here's what I learned. Belonging is something you create, not something you're granted. You belong by being undeniably competent, by refusing to accept that your background determines your ceiling, by doing the work so well that ignoring you becomes impossible. After the speech, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 22. Nervous, clutching a resume. "Ms. Chen," she said quietly. "I'm a senior, finance major. I've applied to 60 firms and gotten 3 interviews. They keep telling me I'm not a culture fit." Her voice cracked slightly. "How did you deal with that? With being told you don't fit?" I looked at her and saw myself at 22. Brilliant, determined, convinced that not fitting was somehow my failure. "I stopped trying to fit," I told her honestly. "I found a place that valued what I could do more than where I came from. A mentor who invested in competence rather than pedigree. And then I proved over and over that I belonged by being excellent at my job." I took her resume. "Send me your information. John Capital is always looking for talented analysts. Real talent. The kind that comes from having something to prove." She cried, right there in the auditorium, and I understood why. Because sometimes all you need is one person to see you, really see you. Not as a charity case or a diversity hire or someone's project, but as someone with value, with potential, with a future that hasn't been written yet. Victoria had been that person for me, and I could be that person for someone else. That's when I understood that success wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving Daniel wrong or making him regret losing me. It was about building something that mattered, creating opportunities for people who'd been overlooked the way I had been. Using power not to exclude, but to open doors. Daniel had tried to make me believe my worth was determined by his acceptance, by whether I fit into his world. But he'd been wrong. My worth had always been there. I just needed to stop looking for validation from people who were never going to give it, and start building a life where my value was so obvious that no one could dismiss it. Not even me. Sometimes I walk through Chinatown on Sunday mornings, past the apartment building where I grew up, and I think about the girl who lived there, the one who thought she had to apologize for her mother's accent, who believed that having less money meant having less value, who let someone convince her that being underestimated was the same as being insignificant. I want to tell that girl what I know now, that the people who make you feel small do it because your potential threatens them, that being overlooked is often protection. It lets you see everything while they assume you're seeing nothing. It lets you gather knowledge, build skills, develop competence while they're distracted by their own importance. And when you're ready, when you've done the work and earned the expertise, you can step into the light and they'll never see it coming. Daniel lives in Connecticut now, works for a small accounting firm. His engagement to Claire ended 2 weeks after the scandal broke. I don't think about him often. When I do, I feel something like pity. Not because his life is smaller now, but because he never understood that power built on privilege is just borrowed. Real power, the kind that lasts, comes from competence, integrity, and the willingness to stand up even when it costs you something. Victoria retired last year, handed over CEO responsibilities to her successor. But before she left, she called me into her office one final time. "I didn't build you," she said. "You were always this person. I just refused to overlook you the way everyone else had. Remember that when you're in my position someday. The most powerful thing you can do is see potential where others see problems. Value substance over pedigree. Choose character over connections." I carry those words with me now as I sit in partner meetings, as I mentor young analysts, as I make decisions that affect millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. I remember what it felt like to be invisible, to have my competence questioned, to be told I didn't fit, and I use that memory to ensure that Jang Capital, the firm I'm helping build, judges people on what they can do, not where they came from. My mother visited my office last month, stood in the doorway looking at my name on the door, Sarah Chen, partner. She touched the nameplate like it was made of gold. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she said quietly. She meant the grandmother who'd raised her in China, who'd survived war and poverty and revolution, who'd never learned to read but understood the value of education, who'd sent my mother to America with nothing but hope and determination. I thought about that lineage. 3 generations of women who'd been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed as insignificant, but who'd survived, who'd built futures for their daughters, who'd refused to accept that where you started determined where you finished. My grandmother couldn't read. My mother was a seamstress, and I'm a partner at one of the most successful investment firms in the world. Not despite our history, because of it, because being underestimated taught us to be undeniable. The girl who walked in the rain 6 years ago, crying because someone made her feel worthless, she's still part of me. But she's not all of me anymore. She's the foundation, the reminder, the reason I refuse to accept limitations placed by people who've never had to fight for anything. She's why I show up every day and prove that competence trumps privilege, that integrity beats connections, that being from nowhere means you can go anywhere if you're willing to do the work. They tried to bury me by making me invisible. They tried to convince me that I was lucky to be noticed by people like them, that my worth was determined by their approval, that success meant fitting into their world on their terms. But they didn't understand something fundamental. They didn't understand that being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have, because while they're busy dismissing you, you're busy becoming unstoppable. And by the time they realize their mistake, you're already in rooms they can't access, making decisions they can't influence, building power they can't diminish, not because you fought them, but because you refused to accept their version of who you were allowed to be. And that, in the end, makes all the difference. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe for more billionaire twist stories where the underestimated become unstoppable.